Hey guys, thanks for checking in to Empire Interpreting's YouTube page. The video you're about to watch is the first in a series of interviews that we have conducted with some people that we've had the good fortune of working with over the years. Today's episode will feature Kip Opperman, who is an ASL interpreter, teacher, and advocate. The interview is full of really great information. We were super excited to get Kip for our very first episode here, and we think that you're going to love it. The one caveat we did want to give you guys is that we ran into a little bit of technical difficulties. So throughout the video, you're going to see some cuts to different parts. It's going to look a little bit like we're trying to frame Kip for some sort of crime that he did not commit, but we promise nothing is out of order. We just had to cut out some little glitches here and there to make it a better viewing experience for you. You'll notice that all of the questions that we had to cut out, at least in terms of the interviewer themselves, are on the screen so that you understand what it is that Kip is talking about. And in the future, we promise all other videos will have a better job of showing both the interviewer and the subject in the video itself. But for now, we hope you enjoy our very first episode, and thank you so much to Kip for your time and thoughtfulness. Otherwise, enjoy, guys.
Settled. I'm an Air Force brat. My father was in the Air Force up until the late '60s, early '70s, and then that's where his last station was up in Rome, New York. So they settled there.
Okay.
They're from Pennsylvania, which is where I was born.
Okay.
So after graduating from Ithaca College, my first job was working at the School for the Deaf in Rome, New York, and I was hired as we were called house parents, and um, we so I ended up going to work at this in the dormitories. I ended up spending a couple of years there. Schools back then were filled to the brim. We were still in the throes of the rubella babies.
Mm,
There was a rubella epidemic in the mid '60s, so a lot of kids were born deaf because of the rubella. And So yeah, I ended up spending 2 years there. Decided to go back and get my master's degree, and I did that at Syracuse University. Went to grad school,
hmm
and that's where I started my interpreting uh, career because of my signing skills and the fact that I did have to, on numerous occasions, act as an interpreter when we would take kids out on field trips and things like that. I ended up getting a job working for the BOCES program in Syracuse, and spent my 2 years, 2.5 years there interpreting during the daytime for first middle school deaf kids, and then my second year was with the high school kids. So that's
It's
where I got my start in interpreting while I was getting my master's degree at SU. Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, I teach ASL now and have for the last 20 years. I turn my voice off and we immerse ourselves
go straight
into,
into.
I learned how to sign from, 11, 12, 13-year-old kids.
Mhm.
Spend 10 hours a day, 5 days a week hanging out with deaf kids. You're gonna pick it up. And that's how I learned it. I did.
You
I
did.
did actually. I would say probably after like the first half of the year, because the school year. So by the time I started in September, and
hmm
then by the time we got to January and into the new year, I was signing pretty well. I was doing pretty good with it.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, I've been playing guitar since I was a kid. Um, did my I always wanted to play the drums, and my mom was like, no way. I started playing guitar, so I've been playing guitar for quite some time. When I was in college, when I was at Ithaca College, I hung out with a band. I did some singing and some background stuff with them. My roommate, um, who was the lead guitarist in a couple of the bands that I hung with. So I did some music back then. And then it wasn't really until, again, I've always played my guitar.
Mhm.
It wasn't until my kids got older, and by that I mean like into high school. I did a lot of coaching. My undergraduate degree is in physical education,
Mhm.
so I did a lot of coaching of my kids' teams, specifically baseball and basketball. And we would go and spend weekends, like in Cooperstown or down in Pennsylvania and Mansfield, and we would go on these long, uh, weekend trips, in which we would play in tournaments, and I'd bring my guitar, and that's what really got me going again. One of the guys that helped coach baseball with me, he's a harmonica player. He and I used to jam in his backyard, and then finally he said, "Yeah, let me come and sit in with you." So he started playing with me, so that we were a duo. And then about a year or so later, the female member of True Blue, she's asked to sit in, and she's a singer and also a percussionist. And that was 13 years ago now, and we do a mix of our own stuff as well as a lot of covers, because people want to hear covers, they're not
Sure.
real interested in our stuff. And so we've been playing. I've just started once again scheduling, so we're booked all the way into, like, I think we just booked the September date, so, and we're still filling in. So yeah, we're playing that. And then
Great.
going back to my roommate from college, he and I play together too. And I go down in the spring, and although we haven't done it the last couple of years because of COVID, and I play with him. I spend a week down there and I play with him, and then he comes up here in the summer in July, and we've done that for the last 15 years. So he and I, Kip and Richie is what we're called, and I'm doing that as we speak. I'm setting up those gigs right now too. So yeah, never dull in terms of the music scene. In terms of what stands out in terms of playing, oh man, we've had so many good, a lot of great opportunities over the years playing festivals, and we do that because you get to hang out with other musicians, um, and then there's usually a lot of jamming, so it's like. Absolutely. And that's an excellent question, Jay, because one of the first things that I do in my ASL 1 classes is I talk to students about, I'll ask them one of the first questions, and I don't usually talk in my classes, but for the first class, I'll spend maybe the first 20 minutes or so, and then I'll say, "Oh, hey, see, look at that, 20 minutes, and we never used our voices. How many of you thought coming into, this class, or, even when you were deciding to take it, that is, if I learned a sign for a word, sign for a word, sign for a word, sign for a word, then I would know ASL." And inevitably, students come in thinking that is they're just going to learn a word, a sign for a word, a sign for a word, sign for a word, sign for a word, and not knowing that it is an actual language. I do that every ASL 1 class. That's inevitably the question I ask, and pretty much they all say, "Yep, that's what I thought it's going to be," and it's
It's a
not.
it's a
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I'm an Air Force brat. So
Mhm.
I spent the first 16 years of my life traveling. Years we were picking up and moving somewhere. So I lived in Niagara Falls, New York, when I was just a tiny little guy. I lived in the middle of nowhere called North Dakota,
Okay.
which oh man, I mean, it wasn't that bad, but it was flat and snowy and cold and bleh. Spent 5 years, almost 6 years in Alaska, in
Hmm.
Anchorage, Alaska. In fact, my two youngest brothers were born there. Spent 4 years in Japan, 3 years of which my father was there. And then the fourth year, he went to Vietnam. And my mom, who worked for the federal government, we were able to stay there. And for that year, while my dad was over in Vietnam, technically he was in Thailand. And
Okay.
I mean, that's a whole nother story. And then we ended up in Rome, New York, although my father he did volunteer to go. And one of the things that they said to him is, if you volunteer to go, after 1 year, we'll give you whatever station you want next. And he put in for Southern California, and they gave him Rome, New York. I'm still here.
Sure,
In the Finger
yeah.
Lakes region. But
Right.
my father said, okay, that's enough. Yeah, well, like I said, I got out of college. I worked at the School for the Deaf for a couple of years, and then I decided to go back and get my master's degree. And before that, I got married. So my wife and I moved to Syracuse, and I did my master's degree at Syracuse University. Once I got my master's, my first job that I got after that was in Boston. So my wife and I ended up in Boston we spent 14 years there. And that's where both of my children were born on the South Shore of Boston. And I helped to start a program for deaf, emotionally disturbed adolescents. That was the first of its kind in the country. My master's degree is in counseling and development. So I was doing counseling with little deaf kids prior to moving to Boston. So I helped to start this program for deaf, emotionally disturbed kids. It's called the Hayden School in Dorchester, and I think it's still there 30 years later, whatever. And then I spent a couple of years doing that, and then I ended up going on to Boston University. And there I ran the Disability Services Office, and was the 504 / eventually the ADA compliance officer for Boston University. So I did that for 12 years, and ended up actually consulting. I haven't done much of it over the last probably 5 or 6 years, but I have a 504 ADA consulting business. So I did some of that type of work up until about 4 or 5 years ago. I haven't done any recently, but yeah. Over the years, we've had these laws that have been passed. Big one was the passage of the ADA back in the early 90s. And prior to that, Section 504 had the Rehab Act, which was passed in the late 70s. Actually, it was passed in like 1975, so mid 70s. And these have certain requirements that businesses and organizations have to follow. So I actually started Kip Op Consulting in 1994, right? So places were still, and I actually had I got a couple contracts to go up to New Hampshire, and I advised them on how to make their community college campuses and programs accessible. That's what got me started. So yeah, so there's businesses, there's for-profit, not-for-profit, who are like, how do we do this? How can we comply with the law? So yeah, I've been doing that for a long time. Recently, not so much, mostly just conversations with people. They'll give me a call and say, hey, I got what should I do? And that type of stuff. So yeah, I did that for a long time.
Do you
part is that yes, things have gotten better. Is it perfect? No. Are there still lawsuits that go on? I keep up with a lot of the EEOC, Department of Justice. I get their newsletter and stuff. A lot better, over time. Just plus, buildings just in general, when they build them, they just build new buildings, especially they incorporate all that stuff into, the physical access stuff into the architecture. Over the years, people have become more used to having various types of disabilities within their organization and accommodating them. So yes, things have gotten a lot better.
That's good.
Well, a couple things. First of all, when I was an undergraduate student, for people who don't know, South Hill is way up on top of the hill. Ithaca is down here, right? And there's these hills that surround Ithaca, right? You have South Hill, you have East Hill, you have West Hill. You got all these hills that surround the city itself. Well, when I was an undergrad student, I lived in what was called the upper quads, and back behind my dorm was this big water tower. And we used to go up there um, in the late afternoons to catch sunsets because you could get way, way, way up there. Now, back then, we didn't have smartphones or anything. We had just regular cameras and film. Go up there and you'd be like, wow, sunset. This is a beautiful thing. And so that's where it really started. Now, I moved away, lived in Syracuse, lived in Boston, lived whatever. It wasn't until I came back here to Ithaca that I realized, man, what it's just the geography here is just perfect. Right now, where I live on this side. So here you have Cayuga Lake, and I live on the East Hill, right? So I'm up here. The only thing higher than us is the airport, right? So I can look out my front window, right on my front deck and see the sunset. Plus, I move around here. I'd say 15 years from now, I'll definitely be finished. Probably going at least another 6-7 years. I could definitely see myself doing that. I enjoy it tremendously. I love the work. It's not boring. It never is boring.
That's right.
That's what's great about it. Plus the people, not only working with folks like yourself and the agency, but also the consumers are just, they're so diverse and interesting and have various types of communication styles. So personally, I think probably another 6-7 years, maybe when I get to 70, I might say, okay, that's enough. In terms of the industry itself, I don't see it going away anytime soon. That's for sure. I think that it probably won't grow as quickly or as much as it has, since you guys have started, but I certainly see it growing more. I think more and more, there's still going to be deaf people out there. And I also think that, just based on the fact that I have my classes, for example, are filled every semester. I mean, we don't have to do any marketing, recruiting, nothing. So there's that interest there, and now there's that much more awareness. I see nothing but good things, positive things. Even up into 10-15 years from now for the industry.
All right, guys, thank you so much for watching episode 1 of Empire Interviews. Special thank you to Kip for his time and his thoughtfulness. We spoke for well over 45 minutes. You guys only got to see about 20 of those, but again, between the editing issues and just not wanting to make this video quite so long, we cut about half of it out, but we really appreciate his time, his thoughtfulness. I do feel like I should tell you there was one last question at the end there, and the gist of it was, who would you see if absolutely no restrictions were put on things? Kip gave us a very thoughtful answer, and you wouldn't be surprised to know that headlining any concert, given his choice, would be the Beatles. So thank you so much to him. Guys, check out the rest of our social media sites. I'm going to put a slide in right at the end so you know how to find us. Let us know if there's anybody else you would like us to interview, or if you would like to be interviewed. We're making lists right now, setting up interviews, and hoping to get a lot more of these out to you. So thank you so much for checking it out, and we'll see you guys soon.